Hello, everybody.
Yay!
Welcome. We
Welcome to
are
Womanist
back.
Wednesdays with the Gathering.
Womanist Wednesdays.
As you can see, we have another esteemed womanist guest, Reverend Dr. Neichelle Guidry, and we are delighted to have her and to have you with us this evening for the first time.
Yes. I'm really excited to be with you all. Of course, I've been following your ministry and think that there's nothing else like it in the country or perhaps even the world. And so I'm really honored to be with you tonight.
Well, we feel the same way about you in terms of well, I've been following you because I pulled out some pictures. I'm sure that you didn't know I had at least one that I've been like stalking you. So we're definitely excited for our community and for the world that we kind of inhabit to hear from you and to hear about you and what's important to you and just what you think and how you experience womanism as a young woman. So Camila, do you want to say anything before we get started?
No, we are just grateful for her. Yes, and we're glad for all the people who are joining us from all over. I see people coming on in the room. I see you, Dr.
Yay.
Sampson, and
Come on in.
Reverend Ori, and
Nelva,
Dr.
my
Delessa,
girl.
and our own ministry partner, Angela. So the people are coming
Wow.
in, and we're ready to have a good conversation, y'all.
Let's do it.
Yes, we are. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. And so let's begin like this. And we kind of start this way with everyone. So,
Okay.
Dr. Gitchy, just tell us about you. Who are you? Now, we mean that in the typical sense, like of who are you, right? But we also mean it in a fundamental core kind of way, right? So tell the people about yourself.
I am the daughter of Theodore and Della Guidry. I'm a native of Texas. Um, and I am the sibling to my sister Chloe and my brother Theo, and auntie to Sloan and Sharif and Tyseer and Henry, and a partner to Oluyapo Haki. I'm the dean of the chapel at Spelman College. But that is connected to a larger narrative. I often call myself a daughter of the Atlanta University Center. I'm a graduate of Clark Atlanta University, where I received my call to ministry. Well, rather, where I affirmed my call to ministry. Clark Atlanta, Spelman, and Morehouse were some of my primary sites of fleshing out what ministry would look like for me and what my mark on the world might be. There were some of my first mentors in ministry and models in ministry, and some of the first people to articulate a sight that they had in me and of me in the future. Were in the Atlanta University Center, and so I see God's hand as having brought me back to my ground zero. Well, my ground maybe one or two outside of San Antonio, my home, and with my family. And so I am Vivian and Alice's granddaughter. I am a preacher. I'm a writer. I'm a scholar of homiletics and liturgy. I'm a womanist. I am unapologetically Black, and I love nothing and no one more than Black people in diaspora. And so that's me in a nutshell.
Well, you said
Wonderful.
that you are a homiletician and a womanist. So, what are some of the strategies or concerns of a homiletician? And just break down a little bit, just because everybody don't know. I want you to speak quickly about what a homiletician is, because we might say this term and we have people who may not know what that means.
Sure.
But what are the concerns and strategies of a homiletician who's a womanist?
Sure. So homiletics is, the formal academic theoretical field of preaching. It's just a formal way of talking about preaching and the practice of preaching, the theory of preaching, and sort of what goes into the preparation of a sermon. Um, The field of homiletics is also broadening to include the spirituality of preaching, and the sort of spiritualities that go into the preparation for public proclamation. Um, Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon outlined several sort of imperatives, if you will, for being a woman who is concerned with the spiritual wellness and vitality of Black women, who, as we know, are the pillars and the heartbeats and the hands and the feet of most Black congregations. Among those imperatives, Dr. Cannon tells us that we must be concerned about the women in the Word. We have a lot of very popular and easy to preach and preachable texts and characters in the text that don't always include the many women that exist throughout the pages of the biblical witness, and in the Hebrew Testament, in the New Testament. And there are those famous women that we know of, those that we know by name, those that we knew by deed. The woman with the issue of blood who touched the hem of the garment, the wailing women. We know women by these sorts of things. But there are more obscure women who represent the continuum of lived experiences of Black women in the world and diaspora. We ought to pay attention to those women. We ought to go and exhume those stories and articulate what they could mean in the pulpit. The pulpit is a site of authority in the construct of the Black church. And we have to be judicious stewards of that authority. We have to be, Dr. Cannons also said, we also have to be very careful about the language that we choose to use when we're talking to women and when we're talking about women. And so things like these hoes ain't loyal doesn't fly when you're trying to be womanist or womanish in your preaching. And being very conscientious about bringing into sermonic light some of what the church, Black church more particularly, has moved into obscurity in the pulpit. Why is it that we have not heard sermons about the multitude of experiences that are unique to women, unique to Black women, maternal maternal mortality, and the range of reproductive injustices, the range of psychological and mental sort of imbalances and biases that Black women are fighting every single day. These are all material, if you will, for sermonic discourse.
Yes.
But we have to do that in a way that pays homage to the women who've endured it, and pays respect to women who are currently enduring these realities, and gives hope. You know, I really genuinely think that at the heart of the Womanist Project, there is a prophetic hope that we can be better, and by virtue of us being better, our communities can be better. So I'll start there.
Yeah. And I just want to let you know, as you were talking, our ministry partners and other people, they just start calling the role of women, as you were talking about how there's so many other women besides the ones we always hear about.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, and it's been really interesting in my lifetime over the course of the pandemic. I paid for a membership to Ancestry.com because I wanted to learn more about my origin story. I wanted to try to learn about my family. And there's just been some real revelation around, like, what has come to what's all in the mixing pot of Neichelle, right? There's some elements that I could not explain before. I didn't know who my family were. But then, learning that story has opened up brand new horizons spiritually. and you never know, like from years of reading scripture and years of sitting under preaching, and I've heard about this woman, but come to find out this condition existed in my bloodline.
Mm.
um how much more real is it? And again, material for the preaching moment.
Yeah.
That this is real. These women existed in some way, shape, or form, and some of them in our bloodlines.
Absolutely. Now
Ancestry
you
I
have
was joking. Go ahead.
okay. Did you want to go ahead, Camille?
Oh, I was joking because I said ancestry can be addictive, at least for me, because I'll
Oh.
be sitting up there and I could be on it for hours and hours. But
For
the
hours.
stuff that you learn, you're so right.
Yeah.
And they've got images of newspaper clippings, and they've got pictures, and it really is. It's a rabbit hole. Like, oh my gosh, that is my nose. Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah,
Now
it's powerful.
you've touched on this some more. I just want to see if you have any more you'd like to say about this next question. So, how does womanism inform your life, your ministry, and your scholarship?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I've lived into the understanding that womanism is a methodology. It is a theoretical framework, but it's most effective when it's a way of life.
Yeah.
It's most effective when it finds its way into your day-to-day ethos, and when it's distilled into the very decisions that you're making and the way that you're carrying yourself and the way that you're exercising accountability, within your community. I mean, so I think, in terms of my work, I try to be. I hold myself to a standard of the work that has been laid out before me. I want to be knowledgeable about what the womanists, the pantheon, what did they say? What did they write? What were their instructions, and what did they lay out for us? I have still yet to read everything that has been written by womanist scholars. And it will be my life's project to continue to immerse myself in that knowledge. I think one of the major ways that it shows up in my life is, we speak often of this language like a preferential option, right? Or a preferential treatment. God having this for the poor, God having this for the marginalized. A womanist has a preferential treatment, a preferential option towards Black women,
Mm-hmm.
primarily. And for me, that has meant, in my imagination, I'm always thinking, how will this land to a Black woman in a number of scenarios? I'm challenged with that because it takes us to the very, very personal and interior work, and ongoing work of self-discovery,
Yeah.
and bringing a keen awareness of how our own history and our own biases and our own privileges have impacted the ways that we've related to other women, Black women,
Mm-hmm.
how and again, raising this question of stewardship, but what does my education, what does my placement at Spelman College, which prides itself in being the number one HBCU in the country, what all these different places and privileges that are mine, like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I ensure that I'm not the only one benefiting from this?
Yeah.
How do I ensure that in the image that Alice Walker has in her original definition is, I'm going to Canada and I'm taking other slaves with me.
Mm-hmm.
The response being, well, you wouldn't be the first.
That's right.
I don't ever want to be the first to think about What does my life mean for my community? Um, I I'll start there, and I really do think that it's a call to see your life as an as existing in intimate communion with the bigger picture and the larger life of the communities that you identify with.
I,
Um,
I like that when you say the communities that you identify with, because that brings me to a question from my new friend, Dr. Venus Opal Reese. She chimed in here and she asked the question. She says, I'm interested in where the women are who don't subscribe to respectability politics. We hoes. How do we find ourselves in your version of womanism?
um, I try to my best espouse a theology and an ethos of, do you, sis, really? I mean, if you're not, I mean, if I think we all have to be sort of the decision makers of what joy means to us, what peace means to us, what security and stability means to us, and how we find fulfillment in the world. And as long as, in my opinion, we're not doing harm, to self or others,
Yeah.
I fully support. However, my sister decides to enflesh freedom. Um, I've certainly had that season in my life, and I know that is, there's learnings and gleanings to be taken from that, and to be gained from those women.
Yeah.
Um, and so I honor, and I ashe. However, folks decide to play politics or not, as long as we're not harming each other.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, you have a book, Curating a World, Sermonic Words from a Young Woman Who Preaches.
Mhm.
Let's talk about that. What made you want to write that particular book?
So this is an edited volume of sermons. They were from my first, I think, like 8, maybe 10, maybe 9 years of ordained ministry. Um, I was just coming out of a marriage, um, and going through the process of divorcing. And every time I thought about that process and, took some time to like reflect, I saw myself as putting my life back together. Um, and I also saw myself as having, for the first time, an awareness that I was my own agent, and that I could create the life that I wanted. Um, and so I started thinking about this whole notion of curation. And this is before curation, curator was like a buzzword. This is I want to say 2015, 2016, maybe here. This is some years ago. um, and what the process, the thoughtful and the artful process of curating, say, for example, like an art exhibit, how the pieces speak to one another, how they speak to a larger theme, what they're reflecting, what they are projecting, what is in the mind of the artists and the curator, what's the intended hope for when someone comes to bear witness to this work and this body of work. Um, the book was broken up into 3 sections. It was like just words that were sermons about social justice, and powerful words about owning your power, and another section. But really, this was sort of like um, an exercise of my agency in a season of my life where I really needed to hone that muscle. And also just a retrospective of ministry. Um, I got a chance to put sermons together and see my growth and see what, was weighing on my heart in certain seasons of my life. Um, and I think it was an opportunity to give something to the world. At that time, I really felt a need to solidify myself and distinguish myself as Neichelle Guidry from Neichelle Guidry Jones, who at that time, who people knew me by. And I was not that woman anymore. And so this was my clear point of departure into the story that I wanted to write for myself.
Hold on just a second. So next to your book, you saw that I had this picture of you that I've loved for many, many years. It's just so poignant. I don't know. It's a powerful picture. And so it's a picture of you and one of my favorite pictures of a woman in the throes of preaching. It reminds me of the Sinhalese concept known as sunny bite or voice throwing. The concept was adopted by Sinhalese women who were resisting oppression, right? So tell us about that picture, considering the concept of throwing voice.
Yeah. I love this concept. And when we had this conversation yesterday, I established just a really powerful sort of points of connection between this concept of throwing voice, because this sermon was a sermon that I preached in solidarity with the people of Palestine. In 2000, I want to say this was 2016 at the Proctor Conference. And the sermon is called The Significance of Throwing a Stone. And I had just come back from a pilgrimage to Palestine and learned about stone throwing as a historic and traditional way that the Palestinian community exercised their resistance and their sheer rejection of the occupation of their land and their nation under the state of Israel. There, at the time, I'm not sure currently, was a ban on automatic weapons in Palestinian homes. And so throwing stones was their way of fighting back. When we were in the refugee camp, Aida, we were told the story of throwing stones, and our guide drew the parallel between stone throwing in Palestine and David hurling a stone at Goliath. And there was never, David, didn't know if his little rock was going to have any impact on the giant. But throwing the stone was an act of, you will not continue to taunt my people and think that it's okay. And so eventually stone throwing became illegal. And the prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, actually empowered the IDF to break the bones of those who were caught throwing stones. And so it became a matter of life or death to resist by simply throwing a stone. And the stole that I have on here was made by Palestinian women. And I wore that in solidarity with them as I preached that sermon. And, when you think about this idea of throwing something, right, there's this intentional force inside of whatever is being projected. There's an intentional force. There's an intention to do damage, an intention to wage war even.
Yeah.
And when we throw our stones, I think without knowing more about the concept of throwing voice, I see that there's probably some parallel there. That when we're throwing our voice, the intention is not for let those who have an ear to hear. The intention is you're going to hear me.
Yes,
you're going to reckon.
That is the concept. Yes. The resistance.
You're going to reckon.
That's right.
With what I have to say.
Yes. Yes.
There's a forcefulness behind it that is unapologetic and is rooted in a righteous anger, and a righteous indignation. Yeah.
Well, you know, when you're a young, gifted Black, and I'm always talking about Black and woman, a lot of stones can get thrown your way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you well, you know, it's easy. You can kind of take those stones and take them to heart. There's different ways we can take the stones that are thrown at us. How do you keep from taking those stones and hearing a inner critic from the stones that are thrown at you? How do you silence the inner critic if it manifests from stones being thrown at you?
Oh God. I have certainly had my share of stones. And there have probably been stones that that has protected me from, because we know that weapons form, but they don't always prosper. But some have felt like they prospered. And I have had to really deal with some stuff. If I'm being 110% honest, there are some stones that I still reckon with.
Yeah.
And that looks like therapy, to really deconstruct the pain and heal in a way that is ongoing. Because sticks and stones do break bones.
Yeah. That's right.
Words hurt.
And words do hurt. So if I'm being honest, I think that is ongoing work of therapy, spiritual discipline, being very transparent in prayer. Like, okay, this is hurting me today. I know this happened 4 years ago, but I'm feeling a little tugged on. I know, whatever, and there are things that happen, since some of those things that are triggering, and, it illuminates where there's still work to be done. So it's healing is in no way, shape, or form linear. As we know. And so I also engage in self-talk. When I begin to hear that inner critic, I begin to practice affirmations out loud. I have an affirmation that I speak over myself almost every single day. And that is this: I am the beloved of God, and I am the child of my ancestors. Everything that they want for me, I will have them. And I say that out loud as an act of healing and just rooting and grounding myself in the present. And Dr. Mitzi J. Smith wrote the book about womanist sass and talk.
Yeah, that's right.
We've got to talk back,
Yes.
even to ourselves, even to that inner critic. My inner critic often tells me and tries to convince me that no one's listening to me, or that I'm not as smart as the next woman, or that my diction is too proper. All these things that we've heard that somehow lodge themselves in our bones, right? Lodge themselves in our spirits. And so I've had to become very defensive with that voice over the years. And there have even been some experiences and some subsequent inner scripts that fall in the category that Jesus said some things only come out by prayer and fasting. And I have fasted before God and before the ancestors and said, until this changes, until something shifts inside of me, I'm not giving up on whatever I'm abstaining from. Because I believe in the power of that. That's some good old spiritual warfare, if I'm gonna take it back with that language. And also coming out of hiding about the things that I struggle with.
Coming out of hiding. I love that.
Trusting that my village, in the words of Dr. E.T. Hari Touré, is strong enough to hold my truth.
Yeah.
and having to be okay and comfortable and affirming of myself and getting out of this other. See, there's the inner critic, but then there's the inner perfectionist that's almost just as toxic,
Oh
Ooh,
yeah.
talk
Oh
about
yeah.
it.
Oh yeah.
who will have you always presenting yourself like your shit is always together
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
got all the answers and your ducks are all in a row and nothing's wrong. And I bind that voice as well.
Exactly.
And I've had to work in opposition to the inner perfectionist by presenting myself as I am in my truth to my village. I'm struggling with this. I need accountability. I need prayer. I need your agreement that I'm going to get through this. I need help, these sorts of things. And so,
Yeah. And that sounds like that womanist tenet of radical
Right.
radical self-love,
subjectivity.
Subjectivity.
right? Radical self-love. That
Mhm.
no, loving ourselves regardless, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Loving
look,
ourselves regardless.
I'm not perfect, and I'm not trying to be actually,
And I'm not trying to be.
and
Not
I
trying
love
to be.
myself. Period.
Period. One of the
Flaws and all.
ironies, and this is probably one of the greatest challenges of being a womanist who does ministry, is that ministry, the church, is always looking for people to put on its pedestals.
Uh,
It's always looking for little idols,
mm,
always looking for somebody to set themselves up as the authority and the expert and you
mm,
know the the whatever.
yeah.
And whether or not you ever agree with that, somehow it happens. And this is a part of my own narrative. Somehow it happens, and then you're struggling to maintain that place on that pedestal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Until you decide that you're not anymore. That's
Exactly.
because loving myself regardless means that whether I'm on a pedestal or whether I'm on the ground, I'm loving
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
And I'm surrounding myself with people who choose to love me, whether I'm high or low.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
We have more questions for you, but I wanted to touch on some of these questions because we're getting a few. Let me see. Somebody, I think it was Michelle. Uh, Michelle, I see your question about that Senegalese word throwing voice. I'll send that to you later. I'll
I
put it in.
responded it.
Oh, you did? You responded. But there's something. She asked a question when you were talking about really like the generosity of womanism, right? Where we're not just concerned about ourselves as womanists, right? She says, how do you ensure, how does I ensure that I'm not the only one benefiting from this, from womanism? That it's not just something that she's benefiting from personally. How do you ensure that? How do we ensure that?
Dr. Teresa Fry Brown wrote a fabulous and extremely instructive essay called Avoiding Asphyxiation.
Mm,
One of my.
my God.
And she writes about how she's becoming a womanist and she's learning the ways and the language of womanism. All she wanted to do was give it over to the Black church women, right? All she wanted to do was bring some women with her, right? She's writing about how she recognizes this has the power to save us and to change
Yes.
us and to liberate us. But there were some issues on the other end receiving it. And if I'm remembering the essay correctly, what she says is like there's so many women who have not stepped foot in academic spaces who, for all intents and purposes, are just as patriarchal as the men are.
That's
And
right.
we've become so conditioned and so maladjusted by that for some women to see a way out of that, they're not interested in it. And
Mm-hmm.
so the first thing that she writes about is she had to find more ways to make it plain. She had to find more ways to translate the language which it would be, womanism started in the academy with women who were doing doctoral level work. Um, and to this day, as wonderful as the gathering is, this church is still a model minority. That's, womanism has not been distilled
Yeah.
into womanist theology and theological praxis, to be more specific, have not been distilled in many churches.
Right. Right.
Even though we see the fruits of Black women's labor holding up the church, and so part of what we have to do is we still have to be involved in the work and in the enterprise of translating this language and these ideas into the vernacular, into the images, into the sounds, and into the experiences that are accessible to our sisters and our siblings. Because it doesn't mean anything if they don't understand. It doesn't mean anything if it's not clear how this can touch your day-to-day life.
And that's why the you as a homiletician,
That's right.
that's why preaching is so womanist preaching.
Yes.
Is key, is critical, because in the preaching moment, you have the opportunity to take the text, right, preach it through this womanist lens and make it applicable, make it relevant, put flesh and blood on it, put Black women's bodies on it.
Yes.
Right?
That's right. And in many Black church settings, we're still just waiting for the preaching moment. In many Black church settings, everything that happens before the sermon happens to set the sermon up. And everything that happens after it is in response to what was said. And it's the climax, if you will. It is the high point of many of our liturgical experiences. And it's such a ripe opportunity to do that work of translating and embodying the freedom of womanism. And I think that all of us could probably name a moment where we preached a sermon that was shown enough womanist. And some woman said to us afterwards, I felt seen, or I felt
yes, for the first time.
Yes. And maybe she didn't say it too loudly, or maybe she wrote you a little note and slid it in your hand. I want to say thank you for that word. And so to your point, the thing about preaching is that it is but a moment. And it, in the best and most ideal scenarios, it is being buttressed, it is being buoyed by womanist ministry that's happening not only throughout the liturgical experience, but throughout the life of the community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like what you said earlier about womanism. Yes, it started in the academy. It's a methodology, but it has its most profound and significant impact in the lived lives of those of us who own womanism for ourselves. It's how we live our lives, how we navigate the world.
I think the other thing that womanism does, at least for me, is it frees me up to always be a student. And to honor the wisdom and the lived experience of women who, even if they knew it, would still not necessarily choose womanism. I think about, even women in my family, my deceased grandmothers, even some of my living relatives, like they may or may not, ever subscribe to womanism, but they've taught me a lot about what it means to live and to thrive as a Guidry woman. Particularity of my bloodline, my family. And so, yeah, I think that the ways that, I don't know, in my mind, more so than any other methodology or framework, womanism enables me to unseat myself as the expert
Mm.
and to be a, to constantly be the student, which
Yeah.
is, to the woman in the chat who's like, what about me? Um, I will happily sit at your feet
Mhm.
uh, to learn
Yeah.
from your life.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't benefit me to hold anything over your head the same
Yeah.
way that it doesn't benefit you to hold anything over mine. We've got a clear path of exchange that we can
Yes.
create at all times.
Yeah. Boy, I could say a lot there about being taught by women who aren't considered respectable. You know, many years I worked in ministry with women who were prostituted, and I tell you what, they taught me so much about the Bible and about ways of interpreting it that were harmful. Um, so absolutely, absolutely. Um, so you have worked in multiple spaces. You've worked in the church as well as the academy. So switching, moving from one place to another, those are some significant transitions, right? So what have you learned navigating these transitions from the church to the academy to the church? What have you learned?
Um, I've learned that no matter where you are people, and you have to be patient. Um, and that most people desire to be pastored in both settings. I've also just learned that you cannot escape one space thinking that you won't have politics to deal with in another one.
Mm.
If you're trying to escape one sector because you think another sector will be politically easier, you are in for
Mm.
a surprise. Every place, every institution is regulated by the politics, written and unwritten,
Unwritten. Mm.
that you must learn how to navigate. In both of these spaces, the thing that has saved my life is mentorship and having someone who knows the space take me under their wing. In the church, for example, at Trinity, it was Reverend Linda Mutri Dodd, who for about 3 years before she made her transition, I was her child. I was her child. And she buffered me and she mentored me and she allowed me to do ministry with her. She was the pastor to sick and shut in. So she spent her days going from hospital to home to shelter, seeing about the members of her congregation. I'm probably going to get emotional thinking about it. She would allow me to go with her and just to learn from watching, and we'd be in her car in between visits and she'd say, like, what did you see? What did you learn? What do you want to know? And I never had to ask her for this. She just did it. And she was a protege of Dr. Jeremiah Wright. And so she knew that church like the back of her hand. And she would tell me, these are your resources. These are your allies. This is how I would deal with this. And there were also situations where I know she spoke my name or she spoke in my defense or she whatever. I know it. I just know it. In some ways she was my Elijah, when she was transitioning. She actually transitioned on Holy Saturday. And that Maundy Thursday, myself and another one of her mentees, we were in her hospital room and we washed her feet. And we asked just for a little bit of your anointing. And
Mm.
she went on to glory 2 days later.
Wow. Wow.
And if for nothing else, God sent me to that church to learn from her, and to see a model of who I can be if I walk with the humility of heart that she did. And even in Spelman, I mean, it's been several women who, hey, let's go to lunch. I just want to fill you in on some things. Hey, I'm going to call you later. Or, hey, have just walked with me. So the thing that I feel like, you're going to deal with stuff no matter where you go.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to deal with people and their stank attitudes. You're going to deal with the kinds of decisions that are made on your behalf that you have no control over. You are going to deal with institutional politics. The thing that I pray for all of us is that at least we'll have somebody there to go through the journey with us. That can help us to navigate with wisdom, and are freely giving of the wisdom they've gained from their experience. I think that's the womanist way.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Yes, speaking of how can how can what I've been through and where I'm at be beneficial to somebody else? Mentorship.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Now, well, we got a couple questions coming in, but I want to talk about entrepreneurship because one of our ministry partners, I want to know about her coffee.
Yeah.
One of our ministry partners, Olivia Gray. So let's talk. Tell us about this coffee project you got going on as a Black woman entrepreneur.
Yeah. So, yes, while I was sitting at home in quarantine, many days by myself, I've always been an avid coffee lover. I've traveled to drink good coffee and had lots of I love coffee, and that's been in my family. I've been drinking coffee since I was a kid with my grandmother. And so quarantine actually afforded me the opportunity to, for the first time, to just really nerd out about coffee. And I really wanted to know, like, where does it come from? What is the process of producing coffee? How do you know when your coffee is good? And come to find out, there is this whole world called specialty coffee out there, that is all about high quality coffee. And so I learned about specialty coffee. Specialty coffee is coffee that has been graded by a qualified official called a Q grader, a quality grader, and has received a score of 80 and above on a scale of 1 to 100 of quality. So if you're drinking a lovely cup of Folgers or something like from McDonald's, like this is like a mass market coffee that may or may not have even placed on the quality scale. It may have fillers, it may have all kinds of other stuff inside of it. But if you're drinking a cup of specialty coffee, you may brew this coffee and be surprised by the tasting note of a blueberry or a raspberry or dark chocolate or baker's chocolate or some floral note like a rose or chamomile even. And so I took a couple of courses on coffee production, and learned about how coffee is produced primarily in Black and Brown continents, but is consumed in European and American nations primarily. I also learned that coffee comes from Africa. Coffee was originated in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is not
Mm.
only the birthplace of the church, it is not only the birthplace of humanity, it is
But
also the
coffee.
birthplace of coffee. And so I learned that coffee is an African gift to the world, like most things are, right?
Well,
Um, and
so
when I
so
discovered the
so
Black history of coffee, I was like, oh, there's a cultural narrative here that I need to know more about. And so I started learning more about that. And long story short, I entered this coffee competition. It was a virtual competition. I received this formal theological training and learned how to brew coffee on this manual brewer called the origami dripper. And I won this competition.
awesome.
And by virtue of that experience, I just gained a community of other Black coffee professionals and coffee entrepreneurs and coffee lovers who share this mission to bring Black people the gift and the luxury of this African gift called coffee, and good coffee. So my current, my new business is called Black Girl Black Coffee, and one of the values of the business is Black women deserve luxury, even if it is just a cup of specialty coffee.
Yeah.
And
I
so
like
we're,
that you
yeah.
call it luxury.
Right.
Luxury.
Mhm.
We have a couple of questions. Someone asked a question: which is best, to percolate, pour over, or French press?
I prefer a pour over.
I thought you were going to say that because I remember what you were doing. That's the process you took us through at the Katie Geneva Cannon
Katie
conference.
Cannon.
Isn't that what you were showing us? The
I
pour
did. I
over.
showed you a pour over. I believe I used the origami dripper in that picture that you had. That's a Chemex. That is a way to manually brew via pour over a larger batch of coffee, and then the other one is a French press. Now I will say that's the Chemex right there. I will say that the French press, I do prefer a French press if I'm drinking like a flavored specialty coffee. For example, PJ's Coffee puts out this butter pecan. Um, and it's not flavored with a lot of sugar. It's roasted in a particular way with some tricks and stuff. But I think the French press, because it's saturated for those 7 minutes, I think it just draws out those flavors. But pour over, to me, it produces a clear cup. And of course, you have a lot of different variables to think about: your water temperature, your water to coffee ratio, your filter, all of that goes into it. But with the French press and even with a percolator, you're often going to get that grit in your cup. Whereas with a pour over, you just get a clear, unadulterated cup of freshly brewed coffee in about 3 minutes and 24 seconds. With a
Mm.
percolator, you got at least 8 minutes. And with a French press, you're looking also at about 8 minutes.
So when can we get some Black Girl Black Coffee?
I am hoping that it will be available available on Juneteenth. That's my goal.
Free us
If
some
Okay.
coffee.
if not Juneteenth, then at least by the 4th of July. We have actually just sourced the coffee, and my roaster has actually just sent me my second round of samples that I just got today. So tomorrow morning, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna cup my coffee, I'm gonna write out all my tasting notes, and we just gonna fly from there, y'all. We just gonna fly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so I just have one question about Black women in entrepreneurship, right? So according to Forbes magazine, Black women prior to COVID-19 pandemic were the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the US. Why do you think that is? What do you make of that?
Well, I think that we're also very aware that, we we are we bear the brunt of pay inequity. we're always doing all the work, and we don't have we ain't got the bread to prove it, right? And so many of us have decided, like, you know what, like, I'm gonna create my own avenues. I'm gonna create my own, you know. And I also just think that there's this way that capitalism works, that we've got to have this job, whether we love it or not, right? We gotta have this job. We gotta pay our bills. We gotta take care of our family. We can't have too much time between one job and the other on the resume or the CV, right?
Wow.
We gotta have these jobs. But entrepreneurship is a way to actually monetize our passion, to monetize our gifts and our skill sets that in other settings, maybe we can't bring it to bear and actually get a raise off of it. But entrepreneurship means I get to name my price. Entrepreneurship means I get to negotiate my own contracts. It means that I get to actually do work that feeds my soul, and and helps me to meet a need inside of our community. And I do see that a lot of Black women who are starting businesses are mission driven. Those businesses are mission driven. And so I'm actually learning, more and more about B Corps and S Corps, and thinking about how do I want to be sure that the coffee that I produce is at every point in the production chain, I'm doing right by those people, and upholding a mission. So my coffee was sourced from a Black woman who's a sourcer and an importer. My coffee was grown by an African woman in Burundi. My coffee has been certified by the International Women in Coffee Association.
Wow.
And so this coffee has gone through rounds of receipts that everyone in this chain has been taken care of, and that is Black women's hands all up and through.
I love it.
And so we have an opportunity in our entrepreneurship to make a mission big, like to make a mission that's to make it bigger, to insert ourselves in a bigger picture of equity and justice while getting paid for it.
There it is. Bam. All right, Camila.
So, we ran out of time. We want to thank you so much, but I do have one question. But I do love how you said Black women deserve luxury. Keep saying that. Black women deserve luxury.
Luxury.
People. I'm gonna keep saying that to you.
Luxury.
We also have to we deserve luxury, and we have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And you're doing a lot. Even in a pandemic, you're doing a lot.
That's true. I kind of
So how are you taking care of you?
I feel really grateful for the opportunity to have really honed in on how I was not taking care of myself before COVID. I think in addition to dealing with all the traumas that were happening, the mounting traumas, the interlocking traumas of 2020 and 2021, for all intents and purposes, being at home, I mean, for the first 3 months of that, I was really tired. And as I was talking about it with my therapist, and it was showing up in all kinds of ways. Like, I was losing my train of thought in the middle of conversations. I was feeling like I'm just not myself. And my therapist helped me to kind of put it in perspective. You went from college to seminary. You went from seminary to a doctoral program. You were married. You were divorced. You were a traveling preacher. You worked at a church. You had that experience. You got another job. Like, when in the last decade, Neichelle, have you had a dedicated time for rest? And have you ever thought about Sabbath? And I never even thought about Sabbath.
Wow.
until the pandemic, sat me down in this house. And for months, I was like, how was I doing all of that? And I had to get real about my reasons that were rooted in ego, that were rooted in even some greed up in there, right? And even like a scarcity mentality. Like, if I don't do this, will I have enough?
Yeah.
And I had to get really honest about that stuff. And in so doing, my next step was, so what's going to be different now? And so the biggest thing I can say that I do is that I have boundaries. I didn't have that before. I have boundaries. I'm clear on them, and I am courageous in my articulation of them. And my boundaries include monthly energy work. My boundaries include daily naps. My boundaries include 4 times a week, I work out with a socially distanced small group workout group. Because I'm also now realizing the interconnectedness of my spirit with my body, and my sexuality, and all these different things that prior to this I never really sat with that stuff beyond the theory, right? And then now having a chance to live into it, whoo, it's a whole new way of life. And so I'll end here. I have 2 more things. I'm sorry. The other thing I'll say is my partnership, the relationship that I'm in. I am deeply in love. And I am deeply loved in return. And it feels wonderful to my spirit.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. And for the first time, since the divorce. And so getting to know myself as a romantic again, and as a giddy little girl in his presence, it's just wonderful. I'll end here. I was in Ethiopia for Fasika two weeks ago. Fasika is the Ethiopian celebration of Easter. And on my second to last day there, I was the second to last person in my group to leave. And so I was driving around the city with one of our guides, and I was the only person in the car, and he asked what I wanted to do. And I said, well, what's your favorite place? What are your favorite places to go and things to do? And so I'm on your time. So the first place that we went was to the Haile Selassie Cathedral. And it's one of the oldest churches in Addis Ababa, named after Emperor Haile Selassie. So we turn into the cathedral, and he's guiding me through this compound, basically, which is, you have this original cathedral that was started before the Italian conquest and finished afterwards. And the history is plastered on the front, like, we did this. Okay, they tried it. And then you have several cemetery sites of famous and notable Ethiopians around, and then there are a couple of like small chapels on the grounds. So in the far right corner of the compound, down these stairs, you can't even see it. There's a chapel named in honor of Mary. You walk down the stairs and you begin to get a sense that this might have been the site of some biblical miracle, because the people around it were the infirmed, the differently abled, and they're all just praying. And so I'm going up the stairs to this chapel, y'all. I can't make this stuff up. I'm going to the stairs to this chapel, and I'm just following Josie. That was his name. I'm following him. And God says to me so clearly, I'm calling you to prayer. And I was like, okay. So we're going down, and Josie is guiding me around the chapel. He's like, lots of prayer. lots of prayer, lots of prayer. And then he turns around and he looks at me. He said, now go pray.
Wow.
I said, you confirmed that quick. And he just walks off. So I go and I found a place, I posted up by this door, and I prayed. And when I got up, he came and he found me. He said, did you pray? Did you have prayer? Did you talk to God? And I said, I did. And I've held on to that. And I've tried to be much more intentional since that moment about my prayer life. And I think sometimes we take it for granted as faith leaders, that we have to have a spiritual life of our own.
Yeah.
And that has sustained me. And it really does feel like care for my soul.
Yeah.
To pray and just be like, here it is, Lord.
Yeah.
Help me through it.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You took us in.
Ashe.
Thank you
First,
so much.
thank you for your yes.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate you showing up and being vulnerable with us, sharing your truth with us, and just helping us in this moment. It was a really good conversation, and we appreciate you, and looking forward to our Black Girl Black Coffee too.
Yes.
We got people here talking about, I'm ordering some. Okay.
Yay.
So,
I hope to have
just
the
wait.
website up in like 2 weeks or so. So
all right.
Well,
we have a few announcements. For those, we thank everybody for joining us. We have people who have never joined us who have joined tonight for this conversation. We thank you, and we want you to know that you can come back and join us for worship on Saturday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we actually have tag team preaching this week. Myself and Dr. Guidry will both be preaching. Starting around, our service starts at 6. It's a 1-hour service, so we'd love to see you either here on Facebook or on YouTube. Also want to mention, was I supposed to say something else, Dr. Guidry? Because I forgot.
I got it. I'll take it. So our next one.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
Yes,
how my mind went. So Womanist Wednesdays, we are wrapping up this season. So our last Womanist Wednesday will be next week with Reverend Ray Stewart. Let me tell you, y'all want to join us for that one. That's going to be another good conversation. We have been fortunate to have 4 phenomenal, beautiful Black womanists. And next week, the conversation is going to be good. So come back tomorrow, next week, Wednesday at 7 p.m. I think I got it all this time, right, Dr. Guidry?
I think you did. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Reverend Dr. Neichelle Guidry, for blessing us and for having this Womanist Wednesday conversation with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been awesome. Yeah. I have long admired your ministry. So I'm grateful for this moment to be with you.
Thank you. You take care.
Take care, ladies.